Hello, my name is Wendy Marusic. I'm one of the founders of Open Nurses, and welcome to our monthly interview series where we interview psychedelic nurses and their allies, advancing the field of psychedelics and nursing. Today, I'm pleased to announce we have Heather Honstein, RN, MSN, as our interviewer today. Please feel free to pop into the chat about where you're watching from. So, Heather Honstein, RN, MSN, is a research nurse with Sunstone Therapies, a psychedelic research organization that provides access to cancer patients and other individuals through a variety of research protocols. She has worked on administering protocols focusing on both psilocybin and MDMA-assisted therapy, with other protocols in the pipeline. She has worked on analyzing and codifying data for publication and to optimize patient outcomes by looking for trends and patterns in Sunstone's first investigator-initiated trial. She has also assisted in writing manuscripts for publication and has collaborated with the Chief Medical Officer and therapy team, creating additional protocols and follow-up studies for our target population. In a fusion of her love for music and psychedelic-assisted therapy, she has also worked with Bill Richards and Brian Richards on updating the Hopkins psilocybin playlist to incorporate a more global and inclusive soundscape for psilocybin sessions at Sunstone. A registered nurse by training, formerly working in critical care, she will be pursuing a psychiatric nurse practitioner certificate in the fall. She comes to the psychedelic research space from the professional wellness world with a background in yoga and sound meditation. It is my pleasure to introduce Heather Honstein.
Hi, Wendy. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really great to be here with you again after hanging out with you just a few weeks ago in upstate New York. So thanks for having me on the show today.
Yes, thanks. We met at the Reconsider Psychedelic Nurses Gathering. Yes, wonderful, wonderful organization, Reconsider. They're also the folks who made Fantastic Fungi.
They are.
They are.
They brought a great group of nurses together to discuss the future of nurses and psychedelics, and I'm happy to be here and continue that conversation with you. So thanks.
All right, so let's dive in. Why don't we start by tell us about the trajectory of your nursing career and then how you got involved with psychedelics.
Yeah. So I started off my nursing career actually more interested in psychedelics and seeing if nursing could be the right way to get into that. It was a bit of a gamble and a bet, but also knowing that I could be totally satisfied in a nursing career in the long run. So maybe about 10 years ago, I first heard of psychedelic research and I was very curious about it and looking at all the research studies that were coming out from Hopkins, which was just up the road, living in DC, and other places as well. I was immediately fascinated and totally blown away by the data that was coming forward, just how strong these results were with a variety of different mental health conditions. And as a result, I wanted to get involved, but I didn't really know how to. I initially was a participant on one of the well patient Hopkins studies in around 2014, 2015. I got to see firsthand what the research was like, got to meet some of the investigators and the other staff that were working on the studies. And again, I was like, wow, this is a really cool career. Wow. I would love to get into this. How can I do this? I did a lot of research on the different ways healthcare professionals could interface with research protocols, including looking at, clinical psychology or, other different routes. And when I found nursing as an option, I was like, oh, this is a really good fit, not just with the lifestyle and the education path, some of the flexibility that comes with that as you find your way into your career groove, but also with the model of care as well. So for me, I went back to nursing or back to school rather for nursing in 2017, graduated in 2019 with a master's of science, even though it was just an entry level program. And then worked in critical care for a couple of years, a year and a half overlapping with the pandemic, of course.
Oh my, right.
Yeah. So again, like I said, always thinking that getting involved in the psychedelic field was maybe a pipe dream that I'll just nurture on the side and hope that, maybe one day something will fall in place, or an opportunity will come up. Just keeping an open mind with that, really not thinking that anything could kind of fall in place. But much to my surprise, through luck, serendipity, I went to Horizons in 2019, and I actually met Brian Richards, who's a colleague now at Sunstone Therapies, and he let
Mhm.
me know of the work that was going on at the Aquilino Cancer Center, where Sunstone Therapies operates out of. So
Mhm.
in 2019, he let me know that they were starting this psychedelic therapy center. They would be running a bunch of different protocols, the first of which working with cancer patients with depression.
Mhm.
Um, and I was connected with the team there, and they had an opening as a research coordinator position, of which my nursing experience gave me, a great baseline of understanding to really take on this role. And from there, I started and got out of the hospital, got out of critical
Okay.
care, and said, maybe this is my chance to see how I can get involved with psychedelic therapies. So that's how I ended up in this space.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, how you so quickly made it there. You saw nursing as a path, and it really worked out. So maybe you could. You mentioned that nursing really prepared you for your current role. So maybe you can describe kind of what your current role is and how being a nurse makes that helpful.
Yeah. So essentially, I'm a research nurse, research coordinator. I coordinate all of the different elements of the study, from patient recruitment to consenting patients, guiding them through the process, and helping them get off study as well. So there's that patient flow and trajectory that I'm a part of. And then, there's also the study startup process. Working with the IRBs, the FDA, in getting protocols, up and running at our center, including writing protocols, or collaborating with other institutions or drug companies,
Mhm.
such as MAPS or Compass, or any of the other companies out there that are providing these psychedelic compounds. And then, from there, really from beginning of study to end of study, working through the data, processing it, and getting it ready for publication as well. I am trained to administer psychedelic therapy, so with MDMA through MAPS and psilocybin through Compass as well. And I've
Mhm.
also done the Polaris trainings for ketamine. And as we expand our program and expand our therapist team, I will soon have the opportunity to sit with patients on these protocols, which will be very exciting.
That's great. Yeah. Could you maybe talk about the composition of the team there? What are their training, or well, are there any other nurses? Are you working with doctors, therapists,
Yeah.
scientists?
So we have two physicians who essentially serve as our principal investigators on most of the clinical trials, and they're also the leaders of our team. We do have a dedicated team of maybe 6 or 7 therapists that we rotate through all of the different protocols. Some of them are physicians, some of them are social workers, or just counselors and therapists, clinical psych PhDs, and the likes. I am the only nurse on the team,
Mhm.
and I am there always advocating for the importance of nurses in the space. Everyone that I work with, they can see the variety of ways that my skills contribute to the study environment, from, the medical assessments, getting an EKG, lab draws, things like that. Even just thinking like a nurse, in terms of
Mhm.
logistics and patient-centered care. Thinking about the kinds of language that we use, and maybe how to bundle different procedures, or medical assessments that we need to conduct throughout the study time period. So I think
Mhm.
those nursing skills of bundling care, of trying to make medical care as least traumatizing as possible, for a lot of patients.
Mhm.
Um, those are values that I bring into the space every day, thinking about how we can ensure that everything that we're doing is trauma sensitive,
Mhm.
supportive for the patients with that lens.
Right. Oh, that's wonderful to hear you that you're there. And so far you're the only nurse, but hopefully we'll change that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The book.
We definitely have a philosophy of engaging nurses. It's still early in the process, and we're still in that process of developing the therapy team and seeing what that needs to look like. But this is something that we've definitely discussed, is that nurses are a great fit for this space, and having more intentionality for training up nurse therapists, or having nurses take on roles similar to the role that I have right now, which is more coordination and larger project management aspects. So,
Yeah. So, what advice would you have to a nurse who wants to get involved with psychedelics?
yeah, I mean, nurses are capable, more than capable, and eligible to administer these therapies. As somebody who's gone through a lot of the protocols and read them forward and backwards and forwards and backwards. And, I have to know exactly what is required for these protocols to be administered in the correct way. The training requirements for therapists do include nurses, and nurses are a great fit for those roles. So a great place to start is to look at the major drug companies, sponsors, as we call them in clinical research. Look at these drug companies and see what kind of training programs they're offering for therapists. And it's that blanket term therapist that nurses, physicians, clinical psychologists, they can all fall under to serve as a therapist within the clinical research space. So I look at some of these drug companies like MAPS, see what trainings they have coming up. Polaris or other similar ketamine services are providing their own trainings and certification programs. Compass or USONA, they also have training programs for psilocybin. But if you start with the drug companies themselves, because those are the folks who are behind the research protocols that are currently happening right now, which, if you think about it, there are only a few spaces where clinical or where psychedelic therapy can be occurring. That would be underground, that would be clinical research space, or that would be above ground, such as ketamine work. Of course, we have places like Oregon on the horizon, and then there's also the legal religious or church-based use. But in terms of these kind of more medical settings, the biggest players in the game are going to be these drug companies. So you're going to want to see if you can join up with a protocol. And in order to do so, you do need to be trained in their approach to the therapy. That will help you to be kind of a shoo-in. And I would say, once you do one of these trainings, you get to meet the person who is the trainer for these protocols. And you can ask, hey, are there groups or clinics in the area that are running protocols right now? Do you need therapists in any of these spaces? And just follow up with them. Another approach, actually, now that I think of it, another approach might be looking on clinicaltrials.gov and searching for a variety of different compounds. You could search psilocybin and just see what sites are currently doing protocols with psilocybin or with MDMA. And from there, you could contact those sites and say, hey, do you need any more therapists? Maybe not for this protocol, but for another one in the future. And that's another way you can find out who's doing these studies in your area if they're looking to expand their therapy teams.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point to look at clinicaltrials.gov. There's so many trials popping up. Surprising how many there are, and you might be able to find one near where you live. So let's see. Maybe you could tell us a story about how people react when they learn that you're a nurse who works with psychedelics, and people ever have a negative or positive reaction to that.
It's funny. I'll mention more. I have more stories from when I was interested in psychedelics, and at some various point in my nursing education or my nursing career. And I remember the first time this came to a head for me was it was like day 1 or day 5 of my my nursing school psych class. And my professor is getting into the drug conversation. And the first thing that she says is marijuana as a gateway drug. And I almost like fell out of my chair and was like, oh my gosh, these are the folks who are going to give me a degree right now. And this is what they're saying.
Right.
And so it really started from there. I had this realization that, it's a hearts and minds thing. And, that there may be a long journey of education of the people around me that I might have to undertake as I go forward with these hopes and dreams. And so from there, I really took it upon myself to meet with my psych professor and, try to relay some of the information that I had come across, some of the articles that had come out from MAPS or Compass or Imperial College of London, just trying to educate her on some different perspectives on these compounds and their potential therapeutic utility. So that was probably the first instance. Since then, it's been a mixed bag from, I've had folks say, what's a psychedelic? To folks saying, wow, that's amazing. And this world very much needs that. Most pointedly, when I left the ICU and I was telling folks where I was going, some of my coworkers, everyone there understood at that point. This was the end of 2020. Everyone kind of understood how important these medicines were after a year and a half, almost 2 years of being in the pandemic, and just seeing the toll that it was taking on themselves, on their colleagues, on families, and on patients, and understanding that the current tools that we have in mental health are not enough, and that there are better tools that can potentially help people in a more effective way. So by the time I left the ICU, folks were very supportive that I had encountered. Yeah.
That's great. How did things end up with that professor?
Yeah, that's such a good question. By the end of the program, I had given her the MAP support psychedelic science sticker. I gave it to her as like a gift, and she put it up on her pin board behind her desk.
Wow.
So I say that's a good win. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Because you were quite ahead of the curve. I mean, you decided you wanted to go into psychedelics and then chose nursing, right? And then went to nursing school.
Yeah.
A lot of the nurses in our organization so far have seen that we're not addressing, mental health, or we need more tools, and then they're wanting to switch to psychedelics.
Right.
So
right. Yeah. All paths are valid. I was seeing it from my own perspective in some different spaces, coming from the yoga and wellness spaces. And yoga can be such a great adjunct, and mindfulness such an adjunct to mental health. And so I was approaching it from a completely non-clinical space. But again, seeing some glimmers of, the ineffectiveness of some of the current options for folks, especially as folks would come to my yoga classes saying, I'm so stressed. My doctor's telling me to do this. This is what's working. This is what's not working. And feeling like I don't have the tools to really support this person or the education. And that, another motivation to go
get more education. Yeah.
Yes.
So in terms of education, so you have a master's. You did one of those master's entry programs. Do you feel that nurses need an advanced degree to work in this area?
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not. Definitely not. I think that all nurses, by nature of their education, from associates through to PhD, innately have these skills of space holding, of non-judging presence. Nurses are master educators of patients, which is so key for establishing set and setting. I really believe like the more psychedelic therapy sessions that I bear witness to, because a lot of them I'm the support person on site. And so I've seen at least, 30 psychedelic sessions, 8 hours each, and been behind the scenes supporting and documenting and tracking things as we need to. And the more I see it, the more I'm convinced that it's just about creating that space where somebody can feel comfortable to be themselves and to be seen and heard for whatever it is that they're working through without judgment. And I do think that nurses are true geniuses when it
Mhm.
comes to that. I don't think it hurts to have additional degrees in so much as if you want to be a clinical investigator, a principal investigator, and
Mhm.
write your own research protocols, run your own research protocols. Yeah, you do have to be a nurse practitioner. That's just the rules. But if
Mhm.
if you want to engage as a therapist, as somebody who's holding space, it absolutely nurses at any level of education are absolutely great fits for that.
Mhm. That's great to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Uh,
hope that we do have more nurses of every level engaged in the process from, administering the protocols, which is a lot of what I'm doing right now, to being the therapist in the room with patients, to being the clinical investigator. Nurses can really embody all the roles throughout.
mhm.
So I want to see like a totally nurse-led team one day. I think that'd be amazing.
Right. I
Right?
agree. That's part of a dream of mine. I think if you
Yeah.
had maybe you had a nurse and a nurse practitioner, think of that as a therapist dyad.
Amazing.
One could be prescribing, or yeah, and the nurse, they're both nurses holding space and taking care of physical and emotional needs, right?
Completely.
Yeah,
Completely. It's coming.
right.
Yeah.
Let's see. So do you ever worry about backlash from like employers or licensing agencies? How do you protect your nursing license working with psychedelics?
Right. That's such a good question. So I'm a little lucky on two fronts because I work for a psychedelic organization. So, um, they already have a lot of understanding around that. In terms of credentialing bodies, that is, of course, a bigger concern for all nurses and all healthcare professionals and therapists that work in this space about how much self-disclosure they share. I am very fortunate that I can speak to legal experience in that I was a participant on a Hopkins study, a well patient study in 2014, 2015,
Mhm.
whereby it was a dose determining study for psilocybin. And so I can speak to that legal experience when I'm talking to patients, when I'm bringing patients through the
Mhm.
process, and they want to know, hey, does anyone on this team really know what this is like? And I can say, yeah, I've had XYZ experiences. Beyond that, for I'll just take for instance MAPS. MAPS requires all of their therapists to have some kind of what's the term? Altered. Yeah, what is the terminology? Altered experience.
Mhm. Altered consciousness or something.
Yes, yes. I'm
Like
forgetting the actual
breath
technical.
work or other types of things. Yeah.
Yes, and that can include holotropic breath work. That can include natural childbirth. That can include a very deep and profound meditation experience. And it can also include legal use in either a foreign country where that's legally permissible or, say, with like a Native American church. I'm seeing non-ordinary states of consciousness.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you. Um, so, to be a therapist on these protocols, you're required to have these non-ordinary states of consciousness. And so we can reference that. If you've also had these additional experiences, if you've done a holotropic breathwork workshop where you had, an expansive experience, this is something that you can reference as you relate to your patients. So I think that that's a great kind of workaround for letting folks know that you know what it's going to be like, and you have the capacity and the mindset to have that understanding
Mhm.
without incriminating yourself in any way.
Right. So such a rare opportunity to be able to talk to someone who's been in a research study as a participant. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about what that was like, or what worked for you, or what you would have wanted to be different, or how you're using that knowledge. You already use it to talk to the patients about, but
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I used the knowledge to help me decide that I wanted to work in this field. That was the
Mhm.
biggest thing, just seeing the research up close and personal, and experiencing the compassion of the Hopkins team, and the researchers there. You know, I got to meet and have multiple conversations with Roland Griffiths, and Mary Cosimano did all of my screens and evaluations, and just meeting such special folks who are
Mhm.
true leaders, heartfelt leaders in the space, and to feel the warmth of the lab and what they were trying to create, and work on at that time, really blew me away, and pushed me along on the path. Um, with that, it was a dose determining study for psilocybin. So I received a low dose, I think like 5 milligrams for one session, 25 milligrams or 20 for another session, and then a 30 milligram dose. And then
Mhm.
from there, they analyzed the data to see what was the optimal dose for most people. And actually, that study has determined dosing standards for psilocybin throughout the
Mhm.
world. Most dosing levels for protocols are between 25 milligrams or sometimes up to 30, but it's usually 25, and it's based
Mhm.
on that data. So it was a blinded protocol. I received 5 sessions, two of which were placebos. One was an active placebo, one was an inactive placebo.
Mhm.
The intention was not for me to receive therapy per se, but it was available should I wish to have it. More
Mhm.
so, and I think you'll get a kick out of this. More so, it was to understand like functionality. How well people were functioning on the different doses. So every hour or so, they would kind of gently wake me up. They'd say, Heather, time for your tests and your scales and all of this. And I'd have to
Wow.
like stand on one foot and touch my nose and touch a wheel that lights up all these colors. I had to sit at the computer and match, these emotive words. These are just like the classic psychology, clinical psych
Right.
tests, the words with the facial expressions, and matching different shapes and colors and patterns. And as the day gets on, it progressively gets worse and worse.
Right. I can imagine.
Yeah. So it was a lot of fun, and the team was great to work with. It wasn't a therapy protocol, but it was a great experience.
Mhm. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would think that would inform you about, things that were comforting to you or helpful to you. You were at quite high dosages.
Yeah, they were
Try
high
to
doses, and it was honestly my two therapists. They were so compassionate, and I had really developed that bond over time.
Mhm.
5 dosing sessions, even though 2 were placebos, that's a lot of time with the team, and really
Right.
it comes down to set and setting, and feeling comfortable with my therapist, and knowing that nothing is too weird, nothing is too strange to express. That really helped me to feel comfortable and to ask for what I need, or to vocalize things that may seem um, interesting or different.
Right.
So
That's great. So let's see. So what role do you see nurses taking maybe in terms of advocacy for like changing laws or policies, harm reductions, something special nurses can do with that?
I mean, I think nurses should absolutely be at the table. I think our perspective and expertise and insight, in terms of how we think about patient care, in terms of how we think about supporting the person as a whole, not just their physical aspects, but their psychological and spiritual components. I think that expertise is essential in all of these conversations. Um,
Mhm.
I also, and this might just be my experience as an ICU nurse, but we understand the rules, and the guidelines of treatment plans and of different interventions, and we know that there's a process, and that the
Mhm.
process is evidence based, and that it works, and it's because of XYZ studies and protocols. And so we have a really unique scientific perspective that we can bring into the conversation, especially as it relates to developing these best practices, guidelines, and standards for the field as a whole. Um, Physicians are great with their medical and scientific knowledge as well. But, a lot of their expertise rests in diagnosis and treatment plans. But in terms of actually caring for a patient and
Mhm.
figuring out how are we going to actually implement that medication plan? How are we going to implement that,
Mhm.
rehabilitation plan? We're the ones on the ground with the patients for 8 or 12 hours a day, actually figuring out the psychology of the patient, what their education or background is, finding ways to connect and motivate with them that are just so invaluable. So I think that nurses really have that kind of real world application that we'll bring to the table, as well as that kind of scientific and rigorous mindset for how things can really play out in the real world in an effective way.
Mhm. Yeah, that's one of the things I love about nursing is using kind of that creativity to how to connect with the patient to carry out the orders, right? Because, yeah, it's one thing
Yeah,
to write them, but then to figure out how to actually make this happen. Yeah.
right. Exactly.
Um,
Exactly. We're the ones figuring it out and working with the individual patients and their psychologies to really
mhm,
bring it to reality. So,
right. Gender, trust, and yeah,
mhm.
consent, right, for whether they even want, certain medications or.
Yeah, you really have to become like a team with that patient. So,
Mhm. Right, that does really come naturally, yeah, to nurses.
mhm.
That's great. Let's see. Maybe we could talk about the Hopkins playlist. You have
Yeah.
it in your bio, so some people may or may not know, but yeah, the Hopkins psilocybin playlist has been around for many, many decades back through all the studies.
Mhm.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about your background with music and then how you're updating things, perhaps.
Absolutely, I would love to. I'm a huge music lover. I grew up in a musical family, and in recent years, in my 20s, when I was a yoga instructor, I got very much into sound meditation, and working with I was about to say patients, but my clients as a practitioner, and providing these kind of healing spaces for reflection and meditation through sound. And it was from those experiences and curating these different soundscapes or creating different yoga class playlists that evoke these different moods, produce these different effects for folks as they breathe and do different asana yoga
Mhm,
postures. um, I really started to see the power of music in a more intentional way.
mhm,
Uh, since then, I also DJ sometimes, play music here in the DC area, and um, you know the love of music is kind of coming full circle with interest in sound design and sound curation, and it's coming full circle as well with psychedelics as well. So as you can imagine, it's that natural extension of curating the soundscape
mhm,
for patients during their psychedelic session. And as we're all, maybe aware or have an inkling of, different songs can affect our moods differently, right?
mhm,
And there can be some intentionality or intelligence in designing or thinking through, which songs best accompany a peak experience, you know, which songs are great post peak, maybe when there's been an emotional catharsis and somebody's really needing something gentle to kind of hold or sustain them. Or are there different tracks that are beneficial, maybe post peak, but not quite come down, that, you
mhm,
really want to encourage somebody to just kind of stay in that space. So maybe something more rhythmic and trance like that can kind of sustain these longer realizations. So I spent a lot of time working with Bill and Brian Richards, who work with us at Sunstone Therapies, in updating the Hopkins playlist. And as you mentioned, this is a playlist that was initially designed by Helen Bonney and other collaborators in the 1960s, and has since kind of become the gold standard of the psilocybin playlists across the world. Notably, it's colloquially known as the Hopkins playlist because it is the primary playlist out of Hopkins at this time. And it's actually the playlist that I listened to when I did my sessions, all five. It has a very special place in my heart. You know, some
Mhm.
of these tracks I'll listen to even today, and it might take me
Take you
back to a
back.
very distinct emotional or experiential place during one of those sessions. So the power of sound and music and the psychedelic state and the healing state is really meaningful for me. As we aim to update the playlist, one of our intentions was to create a more diverse and inclusive soundscape that
Mhm.
stretched beyond the Western classical music canon. We sought to incorporate sounds from all over the world, and also more like ambient or sound meditation type sounds. So, you know, things like bowls and gongs, and different instruments like that as well.
Mhm.
So it was a really fun process to work with Bill and Brian on that. And, you know, each one of us had different opinions and perspectives on why one track should stay, one track should go.
Mhm.
You know, there's an infamous didgeridoo track that I really like. Bill doesn't really like as much. Brian is kind of neutral in the middle, and as we work on our next iteration of the playlist, we'll figure out, does the didgeridoo track stay or does it go? So
Yeah.
it's really nice to be a part of those conversations and to also hear the feedback from the patients as well. You know, the same didgeridoo track could be really beneficial for one subset of patients for reasons I don't fully understand, and for another subset of patients, it's not helpful.
Mhm.
I think that music is a big kind of mystery space in the research and in psychedelic therapies in general. It's you know, Mendel Kahlen's seminal paper that it's the, you know, the third therapist in the room. Um, you know, music really has that potential
Mhm.
to shape the experience, and we're just at the beginning of understanding how and why that is, and how to optimize that as
Mhm.
well. So.
Is the playlist kept the same all the time, or do they pop things in and
Yeah.
out, or it just
So, and I can post the link in the chat, actually, the playlist link. So we created an iteration, you know, partway through our first investigator-initiated protocol, which was a 30-patient protocol for folks with cancer and depression using
Mhm.
psilocybin. At around patient 8 or 9, we did the updated playlist, and it's still very similar to that initial Hopkins playlist, a very similar trajectory and arc of the
Mhm.
experience, just, you know, creating space for music that rests outside of the Western classical music tradition more so. So by around patient 9, we piloted the new playlist, and then we kept that playlist in its form because we didn't want to have too many changes during the protocol. We kept the
Right.
playlist through the end of the protocol. And now during our in-between time before we do our next protocol, that is based off the first protocol, we'll work on, you know, doing another iteration, another pass on some of those tracks.
Mhm.
So.
Right. You could just mention a little more about the center where you work. This is a very unique place, and what studies have come through and what are coming through. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I feel very lucky to work with the folks that I work with at Sunstone Therapies. It's an amazing, phenomenal, talented team. There are some days at work where I pinch myself that I get to work with these smart folks and I get to be there with them. It's a really unique setting in that it's a purpose-built space that was built for psychedelic therapy.
Mhm.
A couple of years ago, the core Sunstone leadership team put in a lot of time and effort in designing this space, and it's a gorgeous space. If you've seen pictures, there are almost no hard edges. It's all this kind of like circular, non-linear design, very organic in feel. And you know, that was our first kind of act towards our commitment to setting really high standards for set and setting. That the setting itself is beautiful and feels not like a healthcare setting.
Mhm.
The interesting thing, the unique thing about Sunstone also is that we are within the healthcare setting. We are designed to be within the healthcare setting.
Mm-hmm.
We're located within a community outpatient cancer center. And the model, the intention is that psychedelic therapy spaces can be integrated and incorporated into the healthcare setting. They don't have to be standalone, or they don't have to be associated with a university or research institution. That maybe the future, we can, when somebody is seeking whole person comprehensive care for their cancer diagnosis, in addressing those mental health needs, they can also find that psychedelic care and therapy within their local oncology clinic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the spirit in which it was developed. It's also, just from the cancer perspective, the founders felt that there was such a unmet need in mental health care in the oncology space.
Mm-hmm.
It's so hands on deck to really aggressively try to treat and manage whatever disease is coming up, that often the last thing that's on patients and clinicians and caregivers' minds is the mental health. And then that is the kind of the aftershock or the after effect that needs to be dealt with as time goes on. The other interesting piece about Sunstone, which I really appreciate, along with the not just focusing on patients' physical health, but this kind of whole person approach when it comes to care in general. So thinking about, at least for these protocols, if we are doing EKGs, if we are doing labs, really trying to make it as trauma informed as possible, and the trauma being kind of the trauma of the healthcare and the cancer process. So just trying to have those values of really addressing somebody as a whole person, and not just as a patient on a protocol. Beyond that, what I really appreciate is that, we do have that freedom and flexibility at this stage in the game to take on protocols that are not only given by these drug companies to us to run and administer. And of course, the exchange is that, if we run these protocols, we give them back data, which helps them to progress their medication from phase 2, phase 3 to approval, helps them. It also helps us because we get to, bring these studies and provide access to our patients. But we also have that unique opportunity to do our own investigator-initiated trials, which for our target population, cancer patients, we have that flexibility of thinking about, okay, what did we learn from the last protocol, and how can we improve future protocols, with the lens that these protocols may become the kind of gold standards or industry-wide guidelines for this kind of population. So the opportunity to have a learning lab around that is also a really unique and special opportunity that I appreciate. Yeah.
Okay. So what studies do you have right now, or are there any ones that are coming? Are they also, or do you have MDMA?
Yep. So we are in the process of becoming activated for our MDMA protocol with MAPS. Will be an expanded access site very soon. That's been a long journey in the making, and we're very excited that we are nearing the finish line. Once we are activated within a week or so, we'll begin screening for a handful of patients. We only have a handful of spots, unfortunately, at this stage in the game, and bring them through the entire expanded access protocol, which is essentially, as I know, you're probably aware, it's that kind of stage between phase 3 and approval. So this is just that opportunity to provide additional access for folks while we're in that waiting process of hopefully getting approval for MDMA in the near future. But the expanded access protocol is really interesting in that they give sites a lot of flexibility in order around scheduling and different kind of structural pieces in the protocol, so as to mimic as much of a real world setting as possible. And I know that they'll learn from our experiences and other sites' experiences and how to kind of practically administer these therapies in as real world of a setting as possible. So.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so I encourage if anyone has any questions that they want to throw into the chat, we can get to them in a few minutes. But yeah, let's see. So you had mentioned some of the trainings you've done, or you recommend people go to some of the sites, the drug companies, to get some trainings there, or ketamine trainings. Is there anything else you recommend, nurses who want to get involved? What kind of trainings they want to expand their skill set while they're waiting for approval?
Right. Yeah, I mean, clinical research may not be for everyone and for every nurse who wants to get involved with psychedelic work. I really, my experience is in the clinical research space, but there are a lot of rules, and that doesn't work for everyone and for what everyone wants to be doing with this work. Um, CIIS has their certificate program where folks can get additional knowledge, training, and guidance on this kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
There are, of course, underground trainings that are always available, which isn't to say I'm not, sitting here and saying, to guiding people to administer compounds in the underground setting, but those trainings are rooted in decades of experience and knowledge
Mm-hmm.
that is just siloed in a different space from the clinical research space, although we all share and borrow from each other. Perhaps one of those trainings with a reputable clinician could give you that insight and expertise prior to approval and put you in a great place um, for providing safe and comprehensive care post approval.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I do think that at least the perspective that I sit in at this moment in time, the drug companies are providing training for their drugs in a way that will allow their drugs to be approved, which is to say that when we have MDMA, prescribable MDMA,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody was making a joke the other day of imagining like the drug company commercials, like when they advertise drugs on TV, and like could you imagine like the MDMA like TV ad at one point? But when
Right.
you go to the doctor's office, yeah, it's like try MDMA. I think that might have been Andrew the other day who mentioned that, like ask your doctor if MDMA is right for you. Um, you know, they're going to be able to prescribe the MDMA within the framework of their therapeutic model. So to be trained in their therapeutic model, I think is prudent if you want to administer their drug. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where I see the kind of connection with getting the trainings from the drug companies, because it will just put you in that better position to prescribe their drug according to
Mm-hmm.
their specifications.
Right.
So,
Makes sense. Yeah.
yeah.
Or any other, beyond that type of training, or you have a yoga background or music background, are there any other
Yeah.
things you'd
You know,
recommend?
yeah, yoga has been so huge for me in my own journey of understanding self, meditation as well. I think that to be a great space holder and a great clinician um, and therapist, it can really come down to how well you know yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and compassion and common sense. And some of those things, you can't get from a degree program or certificate. It's
Right.
really the work that you do on yourself to kind of, clear the vessel and to ensure that you're showing up for your patient and your patient alone. And, to do that work to kind of leave your stuff at the door and just
Right.
remain open-hearted and present throughout the entirety of that experience. So for me, yoga and meditation has been invaluable in that. Different somatic based approaches or therapies that I've, experienced have
Mm-hmm.
also been beneficial. Um, but, when it comes to those kinds of paths, there are so many different avenues and opportunities for that self growth and self exploration.
Mm-hmm.
Paths are many, truths are one. However, you find your way to that place, I think is more important than any training that I could recommend. So,
Right. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So here we have a question. This is from Lo Shiner. Can you speak to the trainings you received from MAPS, etc., in order to administer the medicines? How much did these trainings cost?
Right. So I recently did the MAPS training in April of this year. It was really, really wonderful. It was their first in-person training post-pandemic, which just made everyone feel really joyous and connected with each other and just so happy to be there. That was a week-long training, intensive week-long, where we watched videos of dosing sessions from like 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. And would have breakout discussions around what we were seeing. In order to show up to that week-long intensive, I think we had about 30 hours of online modules that we needed to get through. And post training, we also have another 20 or 30 hours as well. And those numbers may not be accurate. Don't quote me on that. But there's some legwork on either side. The value of the in-person piece in watching these videos is it creates these really rich dialogues around what we're seeing in the rooms, dialogues around our own transference and countertransference, breakout conversations on a variety of topics that in-person organic setting really supports. So I appreciated that. So, MAPS, I would say, is probably the most intensive training that I did. Polaris training was, a few day-long workshops, maybe, discussing what is ketamine, what are the basics of ketamine, and some of the ketamine-specific adverse events that you might wish to be aware of, and treatment approaches. The Compass study was maybe about a week as well, in person. And again, talking about the therapeutic approach, talking about the drug itself, and, practicing the therapeutic approach with each other. In terms of cost, it's interesting. The Compass training was completely free.
Interesting.
The MAPS training was not free at all. It was about $5,000, I think, if memory serves me well. And then the Polaris training, I think it was only a few $100s. So, it's a broad range of how much these trainings cost, how much they require of you. It's interesting, so
still no guarantees, right, about what they'll enable you to do. It's not like you pay for training and then you get an RN afterwards, and that's this.
No. And for instance, like the Compass training, it's free, but you might not get paid as a therapist until you complete your training. So you're not getting paid for those hours until you're certified, which is not that many hours. But then you will be compensated through the protocol, for instance. But for instance, MAPS might have a different model. I don't want to speak on it because I don't remember the details. But there are different ways that payment comes in at one point, or maybe doesn't come in, that might balance out as time goes on. But I think hopefully eventually, to scale up, these trainings will need to become more affordable. And I do know that MAPS, for instance, does have some
scholarships,
scholarship opportunities.
So the CIAS Psychedelic Certificate Program, CPTR, which is where all the Open Nurses co-founders, we all met in 2017. Part of the MAPS training is incorporated in that. So the week of videos. So there's a little covered. So you don't have to quite pay for the MAPS training and for the CPTR training. There's some up there. It's still expensive though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here's another one. I'm a both a BSN and a LPC. I've been trying to find a way to get my NP without an MS degree. I'm assuming I'm correct. There's no path. Yes, as far as I know, there's no way to be a nurse practitioner without at least a master's. There's a national push to go towards switching all the nurse practitioner programs to doctorates.
Yeah.
But normally, the master's programs are about 2 years above the RN degree. The Doctor of Nurse Practitioner is a 3-year. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm one of the reasons why I liked the program that I chose for my initial entry to nursing program is because it was the master's.
Mhm.
And I knew that I very likely wanted to become a nurse practitioner. So now I'm very excited. I started in the fall a certificate program, and it's really just the courses that I need to be a safe and competent nurse practitioner.
How long is your program
The one that's coming up,
to get your nurse practitioner?
it'll be 4 semesters, 4 or
Okay, so
5.
2 years, yeah.
But it'll be part-time, so about a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
about 2 classes a semester, and then clinicals for the last 2 semesters.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Is somatic work integrated into any of the work you have been a part of as a participant or a nurse researcher?
So it's interesting. I would say that somatic knowledge informs the work, but any active body work or somatic work is not often incorporated. It may go as far as, encouraging patients to focus on a specific part in the body where they may be feeling tension, breathing into that part. But there's, at least in my experience and at our center, we really don't do any kind of hands-on somatic work, especially in light of, recent controversies and issues. I think it is important to have strong boundaries and guidelines around touch. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
though I do believe that somatically informed therapeutic work is really important in
Mm-hmm.
psychedelic therapy. I think psychedelics really highlight that mind-body connection, and
Absolutely.
for some of these compounds, you know, highlights where the body's holding on to some things. And different tools, those could be somatic tools or other tools, I think are great fits for helping guide patients through those experiences and out onto the other side.
I would agree with that. I'm trained in Hakomi therapy, Hakomi. I was sent to go do that through the Midhoffers. Michael and Annie said, go learn how to sit with patients and be with them. And it's a great way to do your own work on yourself, as well as learning how to help people foster that mind-body connection. And
Yeah.
in terms of the touching or not, you can do it in mindfulness. You don't actually have to touch another person. They can imagine my hand on your shoulder, which you can do either through Zoom or in person. But just having that awareness.
Yeah,
Right.
that's perfect. Totally.
Okay.
Yes. Playlist link. I'm not sure I know how
There it
to
is.
add a
Oh,
comment to the chat. Oh, there we go.
all right. I think we got Angela behind the scenes there.
Woohoo.
SunstoneTherapies.com/playlist. Excellent.
Yeah, I would love your feedback. Let me know what you think. If you ever have any tracks that you think are amazing, especially for those peak experiences, I'm always looking for peak experience tracks. Please let me know. Feel free to pass along great tracks. Always welcome.
All right.
Ha.
How do we check
Okay.
on your work?
Okay, let's see. I can send you my SoundCloud link. So SoundCloud is the platform that I use. I only have a few sets up and running, but it's something I love to do and it makes me happy. I play here in Washington, D.C., where I live. And the style of music I play, it's a type of house music, I guess. It's down tempo. It's usually a little more eclectic and global and slower, more interesting rhythms. So if you have any feedback for my sets, that's also totally welcome. Totally cool. I appreciate that.
Great. Okay, so soundcloud.com/Heather_Luna.
Yeah. And I just did an ambient set recently. And I do think that this ambient set could actually be a good fit for a ketamine session. So if anybody is working with patients in the ketamine space, it's about an hour long and it's got a nice little trajectory to it. So if you try it out with any of your patients, let me know what feedback you receive. I would love to know.
Great. All right. Do we have any final questions here? Oh, okay. I'm an RN interested in providing psychedelic medicines. I'm planning to get my NP. Do you recommend PsychNP versus FNP?
So Wendy, I feel like you're going to know a lot more about this as well. I think the answer is Psych NP, like FNPs. I think,
yeah.
right?
having just gone through this question myself, so I'm graduating next week with my Psych NP, and I chose that because I want to be able to really dive in and get training in managing psych meds and doing therapy, and really being able to assess, patients. However, after getting all the way in the program and through the program, realizing with scope of practice, it would be great to be an FNP or just an adult NP as well. So you can kind of manage all of the meds. If the patient needs antibiotics or something, or to do a little bit more medical type stuff, it could be great to have that as well. So a lot of schools have a Psych NP like extra 1-year bonus add-on program. So if you want to really go for it, you could go get your FNP, which is usually a 2-year degree, and then you can add an extra year on, and then you're kind of a dual NP. You can do Psych and FNP. But if you're just going to do one and you're really passionate about mental health, psychedelics, I would say go Psych NP. You can always add on a few extra courses later if you decide you really want to do a little more medical.
Yep. Oh, what advice would I give my younger self? That your dreams are possible. I was such a, not a naysayer, but I really didn't think that entering the psychedelic field would ever be possible. This was, 2012, 2013, 2014. I was just like, this is for a select group of people who are already in it. It's impossible to break into. This therapy is never going anywhere. Like it's going to take ages to go anywhere, to be opened up to the larger public. And as we can see, I mean, we really reached that tipping point, especially after Michael Pollan's book, as whatever your feelings may be on that book, but we've really reached this this cultural tipping point. And I think things have accelerated a lot. So if you're out there and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'll never be able to break into this, it's not possible, I'm telling you, it is. Feel free to get creative, contact sites. If you're interested in clinical research, this is the time where things are happening. Contact sites, find out the trainings from the drug companies, and just, network a little bit. But pretty soon, these compounds will be more widely available. They will be approved at some point. And your wildest dreams are possible. So.
Yeah, dream big. Oh, looking at various Psych NP programs, seems many of them only offer 2 to 3 hours of psychotherapy teaching. Do you recommend additional training in this modality? I would. It does depend on your program, how much therapy you have, or depending on where you do your clinicals, how much the focus is more on med management versus therapy. All programs should have some training in therapy. Some of it is a little bit more didactic, more about talking about therapy versus doing therapy.
I think another great option is exploring different therapeutic approaches outside of your programs as well. IFS, internal family systems, is a therapeutic modality that's used or is very complementary to a lot of psychedelic approaches and psychedelic therapies. A lot of the MAPS therapists and trainers and therapists across the entire psychedelic space are using IFS as a really effective way for working with patients. This is just one of many therapeutic approaches that you could explore to supplement your education as well.
Right. No program is going to cover everything. Yeah. Okay. I think we kind of answered this one, but yeah, can a regular registered nurse work in this field?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I'm a regular registered nurse. I am working in this field. I'm doing lots and lots of great stuff. And you can too. Yep.
Okay. And how do we get in touch with you to give you feedback about your playlists?
Yeah, I can share
here's your email there. Is that
there we go. And then I think if we're able to put the links for the playlist and my SoundCloud in the chat, somebody was saying that they wanted to be able to copy and paste it.
Okay. Yeah, we can
Maybe
put
somebody could
those.
throw the email in as well.
We can put that in the chat on Facebook. We could put it on perhaps on YouTube if you wanted, or just leave it. Facebook is more
Facebook is fine.
private. Yeah. So for those of you who are watching through YouTube, know that Open Nurses has a private Facebook group that you can join, where we have great discussions and other things shared in there. All right. Well, I think we're at about time. Any last minute things you want to add? Thank you so much for talking with us.
No, thank you so much, Wendy. It was great to chat about my work. I hope that what I've shared about my path and journey is helpful for others. I'm always available to chat through, different career options, especially within the clinical research space. But I hope folks leave feeling inspired that, you can dive in too. So thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much. And everyone have a great day. We'll see you all next month for another interview.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.